I remember the very first time that I discovered short fiction written in the second person. I was in college and kneeling in a bookstore reading Lori Moore's short stories when I found How to Be the Other Woman. And I was so blown away by how the second person worked in that story that I ran right back to my dorm and launched into my own, maybe over-enthusiastic versions of second person fiction. Now, several people advised me that second person might work in some short stories, but it couldn't possibly be sustained for more than a few pages, and certainly not the length of a novel. To those people who think that second person can only work in very short novelty fiction, I would hold up, in fact, I will hold up Jonathan Baumbach's novel titled aptly You, or The Invention of Memory. Jonathan Baumbach is something of a cult figure in the fiction world, and actually the film world. This is maybe, I think, his 11th novel, and he also has a retrospective of short stories out. You is the very first time that I met him. And I'm glad I did, because this is a weird, strange, funny, compelling, definitely emotional novel. The you of the title is a woman that the narrator had shared a long-term, on-again, off-again relationship with. When the first chapter begins, the narrator is in fact sitting down to write a novel, which he addresses as you and imagines you reading each word. He says explicitly that he doesn't think of this as a love letter, but in fact more of an act of love, because you is informing every word of the book. Now that sounds all very romantic, but in fact, much of the book is very painful. It spins so much on the presence of absence, if that makes sense. You don't see this couple together and happy very often at all. More often, the scenes that we see involve the narrator missing the woman that he is purportedly in love with, or wishing things were a different way, or angry, or separated, or grieving, or happy, but not so much in the scene, but so as when he remembers the scene. And this is where the subtitle comes in, The Invention of Memory. The stories of how these two met, of how their relationship progressed, how it deteriorated, and then ignited again and deteriorated again, and so on, they contradict each other. They don't fit into any clear linear narrative. And this isn't just a case of the narrator having a memory that's foggy with time, or clouded by nostalgia, or even more motivated by present time emotion. Rather, this is a narrator who is indulging in the invention of memory, almost relishing it, telling different stories, focusing on these moments that are often very edgy, at the edges of their relationship, when it's full of uncertainty and fear and resentment and so on. So much of the novel is based on the games these two play. It's interesting that part two of the novel, with a very short piece that comes late, is actually in the voice of you, this mysterious woman who we've heard so many very, very different stories about. In her section, she actually has a name, and she gives the narrator a name for the very first time in the book. And of course, it's no surprise, her account of how things went down is very different than the narrator. This whole narrative strategy that struck me so much, because it made me think about how sometimes in our relationships with each other, we feel the weight more of how we remember things, how we imagine things, and so on, than in actually how they are experienced. And because so much of the memories that this narrator is choosing to indulge in, are really painful ones, it gave me pause, because it made me think about how pain is such a motivating factor in relationships. Almost as if we feel pain, or if we see that we cause another person pain, it's as if we have proof that the relationship matters. There's a scene in Ken Casey's novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where the narrator, after just telling a particularly distressing anecdote, he stops for a moment to directly address the reader, saying, "You've got to believe me. Please believe me. This is true even if it didn't happen." And that's what I came away with from Jonathan Baumbach's novel, that the truth was completely divorced from the fact. The reader might enter this novel trying to figure out, wait, what happened? Who are these people? And when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter. What matters is the version that they tell themselves, the versions, plural, that they tell themselves about their relationship. that is what affects their characters, and that is what affects their reality. Likewise, us readers don't get very much particular information about these two characters, while at the same time being very intimate with them. The second person voice, invites the reader to have an intimate relationship with these two people, these two characters. You know, we are invited to see ourselves as you, and we are most especially in the narrator's head at the same time. So we have this intimate location as readers, and yet we don't know too much about them. What ultimately is clear is that these particulars don't matter. They don't matter. What matters is what is felt, what is remembered, what is rewritten in our minds, what ideas and stories we tell ourselves and tell each other. I encourage you to give this a wander yourself. Jonathan Baumbach's You. It's a strange, emotional, heartful, curiously written, funny. I could go on with adjectives, but really more than listening to me, you should just give your attention to Jonathan Baumbach himself.